What's going on, guys? Conviction 454 here, and in this video I actually wanted to talk about something a little bit different. So the IT field right now is a bit of a mess. There's a lot of people that are trying to get into the field and have no idea how to, and I would like to try and contribute to fixing that problem any way I can. So in this particular video, I actually want to talk about what I believe are the 5 essential skills that you're really going to need in order to break into the field. And really, I would say the 5 topics that you probably want to master so that you can elevate into really more specialized fields. But this video is really tailored towards entry level candidates or people who are thinking about trying to break into the field and they want to know where they should get started. So, the 5 skills I want to talk about is one, customer service skills, 2, Active Directory, 3, M365, 4, Microsoft Azure, or really cloud, I would say, and then 5 would be networking. So without further ado, let's start with the first one. So customer service skills. So good. That's good news for anybody who isn't already in the field and they're trying to break in. So customer service skills are really obtainable through multiple different routes. So you can get that through like retail, you can get that through like the food and service industry. There's really a lot of different fields where you can gather those sorts of customer service skills. I'm talking about as in the ability to actually, talk to clients, talk to people, be an active listener, probe for the right questions so that you can help them solve their issues, etc. Being patient with users, being an active listener, etc. So those skills are really something that's pretty much useful across the majority of positions in IT because at the end of the day you're going to be serving people, and if you're somebody that just doesn't really have those skills, then you're going to struggle pretty severely, I would say. I can tell you from experience because my first couple of years in IT, I actually had a customer service background already, but I, I'm naturally introverted, so I don't really like communicating and talking with people, at least not often, because it drains me. And the entire point behind being an introvert is that it's not that you aren't capable of being in social environments, is that these social environments drain you. And so having these skills is, it's a pretty major transition for someone like me and probably many of you out there as well. And so that's just something that I wanted to bring up before I got into more of the technical stuff. Now, for the second skill, I want to talk about Microsoft Active Directory. I actually have a video demonstration here that I'm about to show here in a second. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what Active Directory is. So, Active Directory is Microsoft's solution for a way to have a hierarchical database of different services such as user accounts, file shares, networking settings, endpoints, etc. And so Active Directory is really the cornerstone for what a lot of tier 1 or entry level IT candidates work on a daily basis. And so having some basic skills of how it works is absolutely paramount for being able to, not just work an IT position, but these days actually break into it. Because, if you go to an interview and 9 times out of 10 they're going to ask you, what have you done with Active Directory, or like explain how to do something in Active Directory. So now that I've talked about that a little bit, I actually want to go on ahead and play the video demonstration that I recorded. It's about 10 minutes long, and I hope you learned something from it. All right, so this is going to be our quick Active Directory demo here. As you can see, I am logged into Windows Server. I believe it is version 2019 or 2022, one or the other. Either way, Active Directory runs pretty much about the same across any Windows Server operating system. Now, from an entry-level IT perspective, what you really are going to want to focus on is, I would say, Active Directory, users and computers, occasionally maybe DNS, DHCP, event viewer, and maybe a few of these other additional services. Now, before I talk about any of that, what you are looking at now is actually a Windows Server instance, but it's also what you call a domain controller. Now, frequently, specifically when you're talking about entry-level positions, a domain controller is essentially the primary server that you are going to be using to manage any of Active Directory's resources. So we're talking about user accounts, passwords, again, maybe some DNS settings, DHCP settings, maybe anything pertaining to group policy or file shares or anything like that. Now, from an entry level perspective, typically you wouldn't be doing any sort of like server like maintenance or configuration on here, but I guess it really does depend on the role. So what you're seeing here is the server manager that comes with Windows Server. And as you can see, you have these different tabs here like local server, all servers, Active Directory certificate service, Active Directory domain service, which is what you'll primarily be focusing on at the tier 1 or entry level stage, and then of course DNS and file and storage services. Now, if you work for an MSP, you may get a little bit more in depth with this, but I would say for most like entry level, level 1 positions, a lot of that stuff is kind of configured by either senior team members or typically just somebody with a little bit more experience. But anyways, in this particular instance, what I want to do is go to Active Directory users and computers, because this is probably where you will be spending the most of your time. So over here, you will see what you call a domain. So this is actually a test lab that I have running on a Virtualbox virtual machine. And ecorp.local is the example domain that I created specifically for this lab that I've also been using for other purposes. And then what you see to the left are some folders here. You have what you call organizational units, are essentially used as a way to group similar types of resources in this particular case, user accounts together. So here under the computers folder or OU, you'll see that I only have one machine here in this particular test lab. And then of course you have domain controllers, and then you have what you'll primarily be focused on is users and then groups. So as you can see, I have quite a few just dummy accounts here that don't really have any purpose here. But in order to create a user in Active Directory, typically, once you get a little bit more experience, you can automate this. But what you may have to do as a common part of your position as a tier 1 or entry level IT support engineer or whatever they're calling it these days, just go to if you right click users and then just new user, then you can give them, first name, last name. Then you can give them what you would do is type what you would call the user principal name here. I'll touch more on that here in a minute. But in this case, you can just do something like tuser at ecorp.local. And if you also use something like M365 or Azure or anything like that, what this user principal name will do is it essentially makes it to where you can use this exact ID across multiple different Microsoft services. So click next here, and then you can create a password. Let's see here. Just come up with any random password, doesn't matter too much here. And then as you can see at the bottom, when you're creating a user account, what you can also do is select different attributes like user must change password at next logon, user cannot change password, password never expires, or account is disabled. Now, generally, you will select this based on what your corporation's policy typically is, or if your organization has group policy and other different security settings configured properly, you actually may not even be able to edit any of these just for um, principle of least privilege and just like having a good standardized security posture. But anyways, if we click next, all right, that user account is created, and what we will do is I'm going to right click this, and then I will move it over to the users OU. just for best practice. So that is a common task that you would normally do if, well, at least when you're at the tier one stage, maybe at tier two, tier three, maybe you have to also do this just for, just to cover for maybe not enough coverage for, from the tier ones. But I would say that's probably the most basic of tasks that you'll do starting off. Excuse me. But outside of that, like I said before, when it comes to Active Directory, what you also may have to do is like maybe troubleshoot why a user isn't getting access to a file share, for example. Now, in this particular lab, I do not have any file shares, but one thing that I will recommend is that you check a couple of things. So, oftentimes, what you'll see is that like a file share or a shared drive will be like physically, or I guess logically in this case, located on a server in a particular directory. So if I really wanted to, I could take the C drive on this server, for example, right click it, and then go to um, properties, and then go to sharing. And then from here, what I could do is share this drive. It looks like it's actually grayed out here. I can also make custom permissions for it. Yeah, under advanced sharing, I can share it here. And then I believe what it'll do is create a file path for it that is locally on this server. But as long as the computer that you're trying to get access to the shared drive for is connected to the domain or the network, then you should be able to access it bearing any sort of like group policy conflictions. So if we click apply and OK, there you go. Now you have the network path for this particular file share. So if ever you get like a call saying, well, I can't access the file share, the first thing you want to do is actually see where the file share is located. So in this particular case, on the ecorp.local domain, this file share is on this network path, or I guess this shared drive, because it is a drive and not just a folder or anything like that. But now if I wanted to, as long as there isn't any security blocking me from accessing the share and adding it to user devices, I can just access this C drive from another machine. Another thing to consider when it comes to Active Directory is, I guess we can take a brief look at group policy. So I would say the basic functionality behind group policy is that you want to have some sort of like configuration or some sort of, again, as mentioned previously, file share deployed out to like several users or multiple users. Or maybe you want to, like at this particular group policy that I have created here for disabling Windows Defender. The reason why I have this up is because I was trying to test a like disable Windows Defender deployment across my home lab. But I don't think I actually went through the process of getting it to work completely yet. So that's something that's still in progress. But essentially, if you look at this group policy, it's enforced, link enabled. But if I go to edit, then what I can do is I can actually change the policy parameters at the computer configuration or the user configuration level. And so group policy has all this built in, so you don't have to like import or like get any of this information from like an external source. So like for example, let's say like Windows settings, you got log on properties, you've got log off properties, security settings, software restriction policies. There is really a lot that you can do with group policy, really. Like map to drives, let's see, files, folders. Yeah, there's really a lot. But at any point, and again, this is a little less relevant for probably tier one. Group policy may be more like tier two, tier three, or systems administration level where you're actually going in and configuring policies. But just knowing about group policy in general is best advised when it comes to really any sort of IT position that deals with any sort of Microsoft architecture. So I would say that's pretty much going to be it for this particular demo on Active Directory. I can, what I would like to do anyway in the future is maybe go a little bit more in depth into Active Directory's capabilities. But for now, I think that should suffice when it comes to actually getting started. And another thing I would like to do is actually like maybe record a video on how to actually deploy Active Directory from scratch because what I would implore anyone who watches this video or anyone who finds this video useful, um, if you've never done this before, it is very easy and it's pretty much free to just deploy a Windows Server VM and play around with Active Directory and the several different settings that it has. So yeah, that's going to be it for this Active Directory demo. So the third skill that I actually wanted to talk about is M365. And when I say M365, I mean Microsoft's really entire production suite. So we're talking about Microsoft Outlook, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, SharePoint, OneDrive, and I'm sure I'm missing some others. But being able to support and troubleshoot different applications in this suite is important because 9 times out of 10 your users are going to be implementing this in some way in their environment. And so as a tier one, of course, you're not expected to know everything about M365 coming in. As a matter of fact, 5, 6 years ago when I came in, I barely understood like the inner workings of Outlook. I mean, I've touched Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and Excel before, in grade school, but you don't actually understand how to support it, when you haven't really gotten the IT exposure yet. And so in this upcoming video demonstration, I do talk about M365 administration at a fairly in-depth level for beginners, but in terms of like troubleshooting scenarios and all that, that may be a video that I cover like in the future. But anyways, the video demonstration should play now. All right, so this is going to be our M365 administration demo. So as a tier one, any sort of IT position where you're using M365, typically where you're going to spend most of your time is under these two tabs here. So users and then groups. Um, for this particular lab environment, the same users that you saw in my Active Directory demo are going to show up here because I actually have Active Directory. I have a hybrid connection set up between my on-premises AD and Azure's Active Directory, which I will also show you during the Azure demonstration. But typically, so what you can see is not all of my accounts are even licensed with M365 licenses. As a matter of fact, 3 of them have Defender for Identity licenses, but none of them have like a E3 or E5 license. Now, those particular licenses, the Office E5 or E3 licenses, those are actually going to be what give you access to like M365 applications such as OneDrive, SharePoint. It'll give them an Outlook inbox. It'll give them like Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, etc. So they're going to have that license. Now, looking at my lab environment now, it appears that I actually do not have that license, which I thought I did, but I believe in order to actually go and acquire new licenses for your environment, which is a little bit out of scope for a tier one, is I believe you can just get them from Microsoft or their marketplace through here. So you can purchase Business Basic. More than likely, your environment's going to have like Business Basic or Office E3 or E5. And you can do that through here, but 9 times out of 10, this probably won't even be accessible by you if you're a tier one. But yeah, typically you go here, like you can get M365 Business Premium, Business Basic, etc. Outside that, you'll also have groups. And so under groups, I don't really have any. These are actually built-in groups, but here you can create distribution lists and security groups. Now, you can also create what's called a shared mailbox. Now, for distribution lists in particular, um, just imagine that you have a group of users that you want to put under a very specific alias. And under that alias, if somebody from outside the organization were to send emails to that alias, then that email gets distributed across anybody that's in that particular distribution list. So again, I don't have any here, but if I were to create one, um, all right, so I actually had to start a M365 Business Basic subscription in order to enable the ability to add distribution lists. So essentially, yeah, going back to what I was saying before, so if I wanted to create a distribution list, I can just go through here. Let's give it a generic name like that. Um, it doesn't really need a description. I can assign an owner. So let's see. Huh. Um, so my user account should be loading here. I'm not sure why they aren't. All right, there it goes. So it just took a little while. So I'm gonna add myself as the owner, and then for the members, uh, yeah, we can add this Naruto Uzumaki account. One of the best anime protagonists ever, by the way. Okay, so then what we would do is we would give a group email alias that all these members can be added to and fall under so that whenever an email is sent to this alias, that everyone in that list will get the email. So, all right, then allow people outside this organization to send email to this distribution group. And then we create the group, and that's pretty much how you would create a distribution list. Now, there's also M365 groups and shared mailboxes. Now, M365 groups in particular are meant specifically for like M365 services that require some sort of shared communication. So we're typically talking about SharePoint, and maybe OneDrive, where you would collaborate and kind of share files together. And I believe there are some other services tied to M365 groups. Now, M365 groups are a little bit more recent as Microsoft tries to kind of invent ways where identity and access management principles can be a little bit more, I guess, like task specific instead of just, lumping everybody into either a distribution list or a shell mailbox, for example. Um, Beyond that, another thing that you may look at when it comes to like a tier one or like entry level perspective is Exchange Online. Now, unfortunately, uh, for Exchange Online, it requires to have a license, but I believe under this particular tenant, I already used the trial for it. So I may not be able to show that as of now. I may have to actually create a new tenant for that. And that's something that I may just talk about further in a future video. But essentially, what you're dealing with when it comes to Exchange Online is just think of Exchange as your like mailing server. And so any emails that your organization receives will typically come through Exchange if you're using like a complete Microsoft architecture. And so during in Exchange Online as a tier one tab that you may do is go in there and use something that's called a message trace. So that's essentially looking to see if anybody in your environment either sent or received a certain type of email. I wish I could show you how it looks now, but unfortunately, like I said, I do not have the access. But that is one task that you may do in there. And similarly to here in the typical M365 Admin Center, you can also access your groups and user mailboxes and whatnot through there. And you can change things like message size, delivery restrictions. You can configure rule sets. It's actually very, very detailed when it comes to what you can do for email implementation and security. But I would say that is the basics of M365 Admin Center. If you click down to where it says show all, you can also see that there are other admin centers that you may or may not have access to. So this is how you can access the Microsoft Defender portal, for example. And in the Defender portal, you can configure all sorts of security policies. You can configure something called Azure Sentinel, which is something that I love to use personally. Then you've got Microsoft Purview, which is really more of a compliance and data loss prevention admin center. You've got Microsoft Intune for like endpoint management. Unfortunately, while I do have experience with Intune, one, it's not really something that you'll see at the tier one level very often. And two, it's something that you also need a license for, which I believe I already used the trial for it. Outside that, you can also access Azure, and there's also something called the Microsoft Intra portal, which Microsoft Intra is essentially what Azure's, or I guess it's really what Microsoft is trying to roll like on-premises AD over into eventually. So you got on-prem AD and then you've got the cloud AD, and it sounds like Microsoft is trying to eventually have everything be cloud-based. But I'm not really sure how close we are to getting to that point yet, to be honest with you. Um, but yeah, I would say that's pretty much the basics of M365 Admin Center. Again, I do apologize for not being able to show you everything that M365 Admin Center is capable of and what you can access and whatnot. Um, but like I said, in future videos, I will definitely be exploring the like inner workings of it at a more detailed level. But anyway, that's going to be it for the M365 demo. All right, and the fourth skill that I believe entry level candidates should have some sort of understanding of is the cloud. So, what is the cloud? So, it can be pretty difficult to explain what the cloud is to somebody who's non technical, or really to even somebody who's technical, because the cloud continues to expand. But the way that I look at it is that the cloud, for the most part, is really just an extension of an on premises environment that can be accessed really from any location. And the cloud is capable of identity access management, it's capable of implementing like security systems and networking systems. I, at least for the time being, consider it as an extension of an on premises physical network, where in the cloud, really, you can control whether you either have access to everything that's in your cloud subscription, or you delegate access to other people that are hosting like virtual machines or servers, for example, in a cloud environment. But anyways, for this particular video, I want to discuss Microsoft Azure. I actually do have a video demonstration for this as well. Um, but I would say from an entry level perspective, at the very least, you want to understand, what the cloud is capable of. And when I say that, I mean from a pretty basic perspective, like what is the cloud? What can the cloud do? Not necessarily how do I do it, but I talk about that in more detail in the demonstration coming up. All right, so this is going to be our Microsoft Azure demonstration here. So from an entry level perspective, the first thing that I would probably tell you is that you should not get overwhelmed by Azure, because it does really have a lot of different features. There's a lot of different stuff that you can configure through here. And so what I would recommend starting off is that you focus specifically on Microsoft Entra ID, virtual machines, resource groups, and maybe storage accounts. I wouldn't worry about Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Azure Monitor, virtual networks, or anything else for the time being when you're getting started off for the cloud and entry level and whatnot. So the first thing I will do is actually go to Microsoft Entra ID. And here at Entra ID, similar to what I mentioned in a previous demonstration, all of my user accounts are pretty much synced between on-premises AD, Azure, and M365. So click here. You can find my user accounts here. Now, as you're going through user accounts, a few useful tips to know is you can enable, disable accounts. You can set up multi-factor authentication. For those of you who don't know what multi-factor authentication is essentially a security implementation, and that allows for you to force users to authenticate using multiple methods. And so in this particular case, each user in my environment is required to use both a password and authenticate using their mobile device. And so if I go here, this is just a dummy account. I actually do not have MFA set up for this particular account, but if you were to set it up, then you can have Microsoft Authenticator, and then you can add another MFA method such as phone number, temporary access pass, or QR code. Now, usually how this is implemented is that somebody like the global administrator or somebody with more experience or a higher role assignment than you will give you access to be able to mess around with these things and all, because if you don't have the access, then you're not going to be able to do this. But typically in a like tier 1 environment, you should have access to at least alter user accounts in some way. Of course, you can reset the password, you can require for them to re-register the multi-factor, and then you can also revoke their Microsoft session. So essentially what this will do, anything that's tied to Intra or M365, their sessions will be revoked, and then they'll have to re-authenticate again using whatever their specified authentication methods are. Now, another thing to look at is audit logs. So audit logs, you can see various changes that were done pertaining to this account. So this user was added recently to the Microsoft Business Basic. They were given a Business Basic license here. As you can see, the change user license, and then the user was updated. You can see where it was initiated from, like the M365 portal, the substrate management, and you can also see who updated the per user multi-factor authentication. So that was yours truly. So beyond that, you also have sign-in logs for this particular account. This account hasn't signed in the last 24 hours. Of course, I can change that. I think I did sign into this about maybe 2-3 weeks ago, but it should be logged here. And the interesting part about it is that even if this was just on-prem, because the two environments are actually synced together, then even if it's just an on-premises login, I could still get those logs to come in through here. It looks like it's taking a while to load right now. Okay, so no sign-ins found. Let's see, you can also enter like a custom time interval. So if I wanted to go all the way back to, let's say, like April, and then to now, which I believe is still the 11th. Yeah. That should. Let's do 8 a.m. to now. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I signed into this account recently, but either way, the log should show up here. So it's not necessarily important to see this now, but it is something to take into account if you're ever in. Let's say you need to verify if a user account, honestly, if it was, maybe it could have even been compromised. It didn't even necessarily have to be that user, but if anybody got access to this account and signed into it, it should log here. But for some reason, it's just not. Let me see. Let's actually check a different account. Let's check my account, sign-in logs. There you go. See. Yep, there goes when I signed in, technically yesterday now, since it is now midnight. Yeah, so anyways, some other things that you can look at in here are assigned roles. I don't think this particular account has any assigned roles. And then eligible assignments ties more into privileged identity management, which really goes beyond the scope of like tier 1 level. So I won't talk about it. Now I think this account should have some roles. Yep, there we go. So this account has compliance administrator, security administrator, domain name, pretty much everything in this tenant I can obviously manage because it's my tenant. So then of course you've got Azure role assignments. You don't have permission to read. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's probably because Azure role assignments are essentially, when you're assigned different roles based on the different job tasks that you have assigned to it. So usually somebody who has like global administrator rights or any sort of permissions to actually assign roles to other users, then they're eligible to actually provide role assignments. Now, again, this probably isn't something that you'll initially have access to. But moving on, you also have devices. There's no devices attached to this user account. And then you've got enterprise apps. I got Apple Internet accounts. Now, I believe the reason why this is here is because I actually have a MacBook and I registered for Apple devices to be able to like access Azure or M365 through a Mac device, which is actually needed for that to work. So, and then you've also got Thunderbird, which is something that I was using for a security home lab. But outside that, I would say that is the gist of what you would be working with, particularly with Entra ID. Now, of course, like as I mentioned before, you've got resource groups and storage accounts. Now, this is typically for when you want to obviously create like just think of storage accounts as similar to like files or folders in an on-premises environment. And then in storage accounts, you would put different assets, like you would put blobs or queues or tables, which are essentially the 4 different types of data. Well, they're actually called data types that you can put into these storage accounts and then access them like their files and whatnot. Now, keep in mind that pretty much everything in Azure costs money. Anything pertaining to like actually storing data and then accessing data, what I highly recommend that you do is read up on the Azure documentation because they always try to hit you with hidden costs. Now, with Entra ID, I think Entra ID in particular is a free service. So in terms of actually creating user accounts, assigning roles, etc., that should all be free. And then, of course, you have virtual machines. Virtual machines definitely cost money. In this particular tenant, I actually do not have a virtual machine. And truth be told, for this particular demonstration, I may hold off on actually creating a virtual machine, but that is definitely something that I can cover in future videos. But anyways, for now, that's pretty much going to be it for the Azure demonstration. All right, and then the fifth and final skill that I want to talk about is networking. So what is networking? There is no IT at all without networking. So the network, is pretty much the backbone behind how all of your different IT systems communicate. Again, no network, there's no communication. Your local network would never be able to actually access any other outside network without some sort of networking implementation. And so in this particular case, now you're able to watch my video right now because you have access to a network. And right now what I have is just like any of you, a home router that is connected to the network right now. They enabled me to even upload this video to YouTube. So I'm sure you understand that much, but the idea that I'm trying to express here is that you want to understand the basics. So you want to understand what an IP address is. You maybe want to understand like how a switch operates, how a router operates, what a wireless access point is, DNS, DHCP, things of that nature. And so one thing that I would recommend that you do if you have really no knowledge of networking at all is to consider a certification that I actually do not particularly like that much, but the Network Plus. And the reason why I bring up the Network Plus in particular is because it is a decent entry point for learning networking, but I personally believe that there is a better certification for it, and it's called the CCNA. But anyways, I do have a shorter demonstration video that should be coming up. Alright, so this demonstration is going to be pretty brief, just talking about some of the basic networking concepts that you'll want to understand. I'm going to go over at a surface level, and I highly recommend that you continue to increase your knowledge and expand by pursuing like the Network Plus or the CCNA certification. But anyways, what you're looking at in front of you right now is Cisco Packet Tracer, which is a part of the CCNA learning material. Now, you'll have to create like a Cisco account in order to access this software. But before that, a few things that you should know when talking about networking is that, of course, when you log into any Windows device, you'll see your network connections here. Currently, I am actually hardwired to my home router actually through a switch. And so, of course, you can see that by just looking at the icon here. Now, on Windows 11, if you right click down here, you can like run a diagnose network problems. You can also do a speed test as well as network and internet settings. Now, if you click here and go to Ethernet, you can see the different settings that your current network that you're connected to right now is on. So again, I mentioned DHCP very briefly in this video, but essentially what DHCP stands for is Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. And this protocol essentially allows for your device to be able to contact a DHCP server. In this case, it will be my home router. Now, anybody who has a home router in this day and age, it probably also serves as a DHCP server. And so this is going to give you a IP address so that you can essentially connect to the internet. As you can see, my private IP address down here is 192.168.0.69. And then the default gateway is essentially what you need to know about that for now is it is the device that's enabling your local area network to access networks outside of that local area network, essentially the internet, because the internet is really just one large network. And so with DHCP, my router was able to give me this IP address, and then it also configured itself with this IP address. Also, typically, when you do get a new router and change internet service providers, they typically give you like the default gateway address and other important information. And then you can also see other things pertaining to this particular network connection, or NIC is what it's called, or network interface connection. It's Realtek, that's the manufacturer. Then you've got the driver version, then you've got the physical MAC address. Now the MAC address is pretty much just a physical identifier for your NICs. Beyond that, if I wanted to, I could edit this, and then let's say I wanted to actually have like a manual configuration, I could do that. But of course, right now I have no reason to actually change this into anything manual. I mean, I could just put it on another IP in the 192.168 subnet, but there's no reason for me to do that. And speaking of subnets, a subnet is essentially just a network within a like larger network that you can use to put specific devices on a specific subnet, so that either you can configure additional controls to where maybe they can only communicate with other devices in that subnet, or maybe they can communicate to other subnets, but that's going into a little bit more networking detail. So what I would say is just have an understanding of what an IP address is, what DNS is, what DHCP is, what a physical NIC is, what a MAC address is. And really, when it comes to like entry-level IT, you should be fine. You can pretty much learn anything else that you would need to know about networking on the job. But beyond that, now that we're looking at Packet Tracer, this is pretty much a way for you to practice using switches and routers and wireless devices, etc. And what you can do through here is you can actually like create your own networking topology, which is essentially a network diagram. And so while I won't be digging too deep into that now, this is just a good way to familiarize yourself with networking and actually come to understand the basics. But typically, you won't be doing any sort of like architecture or design or anything like that in entry-level IT, but what you will need to know is the things that I just mentioned previously, such as what an IP address is, what DNS is, which is domain name system. Think of DNS as essentially, one of my instructors back in the day described DNS as a phone book for the internet. And I actually think that is a very good way to explain it, but maybe a little bit oversimplified. So essentially, whenever you type in like a website, for example, into a browser, like let's say you typed in Google or Facebook, computers read that through IP addresses. They don't actually read the text that you enter into the browser. And so whenever you're searching for any sort of website, you're really searching for its IP address. And so DNS is what enables the names to be resolved into those IP addresses. So one thing that you can do, for example, is open the command prompt. And then what I'm going to do is just run a quick NS lookup. This is a very commonly used DNS tool. And what this is essentially do is give me a non-authoritative answer to what it believes the DNS servers for Google are. Now, Google probably uses dynamic DNS. They probably have several different DNS servers around the world. But this is a quick and simple way to see if your device in particular is even capable of running DNS requests. And so normally the way that works in a Windows environment is that all of your endpoints are going to have a file called a host file. That host file is going to be the first resource that's used in order to determine or check to see if it has any sort of cached information or DNS information in particular. So if your host file is empty, then more than likely what you'll be using for DNS is some sort of Windows server, whether it be a domain controller or a separate Windows server in order to actually process those requests. And then if that server does not have the particular domain name that you're looking for, then you'll reach out to what you call like an authoritative DNS server, which typically goes outside of like your domain environment into more like deeper into like another network. And then you've also got like top level DNS servers, which are DNS servers at like the .com, .net, .gov level, which pretty much have the bulk of all of the addresses, or in this case domain names that you would typically ever really need. And so DNS is a very multi-layered approach, and that's something that, while not necessarily that you need to know in much detail at the entry level, it's something that is probably a good idea to know as you move up to like tier 2, tier 3, etc. And so with all of that in mind, this is pretty much the final video demonstration. So yeah, I'm going to go back to the original video now. Alright, and that's pretty much going to be it for this video. The only other thing that I will mention when it comes to getting into IT is that I guess I probably should talk about certifications. So I mean, there's networking certifications like the Network Plus and CCNA. There's the CompTIA A+, which is pretty much it's still a very popular certification, but me in particular, I do have it. I got it back in 2021, but a lot of the concepts that I learned from the A+, I never really used. I have to be honest with you. I mean, maybe some of the printing knowledge that I learned, and maybe some of the like ticketing knowledge that it kind of covers, but not really. Then there's the Security Plus. Highly recommend the Security Plus if you are interested in eventually getting a cybersecurity role, which the cybersecurity market is very difficult to get into right now, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And then also a cloud cert. I think at least one cloud certification would be good as well. So look into the AZ900, for example. As a matter of fact, yeah. I would say start with the AZ900. I believe AWS has like the cloud practitioner certification if you are interested in AWS. But beyond that, I guess some honorable mentions. Uh, I know somebody out there is probably waiting for me to mention AI. Getting into tech, you don't really need to know much about AI. Maybe the basics, like how a learning language model works, at a very basic level, but even then, that's probably stretching it. Virtualization, that's something that I only talked about very loosely here, but it's probably something that you should have knowledge of. So install Virtualbox and learn how to deploy a Windows Server VM. Create a home lab. Absolutely create a home lab. If you take nothing else from this video, please, please, please make a home lab and then practice all or at least some of the concepts that I've talked about in this video here. It's pretty much free to set up. All you need is a device with maybe 16 gigs of RAM, even though 16 gigs may not be necessarily enough now because of Microsoft and their antics. But I would say, yeah, absolutely do a home lab if nothing else. And all of the like M365 and Azure and pretty much everything that I've shown in this video should be free to set up. And if you guys would like, I can actually sorry, it's late, really late right now, but I could create some future videos just showing you how you can actually set up your own home lab. And as a matter of fact, if you look under my channel, you should see a couple of home labs I've already been working on that go a little bit outside the scope of this, but are still very, very relevant. Specifically talking about Microsoft Azure and pfSense. It's really a cybersecurity home lab that I've been working on. But with that being said, I think that's pretty much going to be it for this video. I hope you guys learned something from the demonstrations. I do apologize if there's some weird quality issues going on because I actually used 2 devices to record this entire video. But I do hope you learned something from it. If there's any questions, comments, feel free to leave them down below. And as usual, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.